Most people walk into a classroom, a meeting, or a lecture hall, carrying phones, laptops, and expensive devices. But if you quietly observe the most thoughtful minds in the room, you will often notice something small, almost invisible. It sits in their hand or rests quietly on the table, strangely simple, almost old-fashioned. Yet this small habit appears again and again among people who learn faster, remember more, and think more clearly. It seems too ordinary to matter. But psychology tells a different story, because intelligence is rarely loud. It hides in small behaviors repeated every day. And one of those behaviors reveals something deeper about how the mind actually learns. Two students sit in the front row, and one opens a laptop, dozens of tabs glowing on the screen. The other places a notebook on the desk and holds something small in their fingers. The lecture begins. Information moves quickly. Concepts stack on top of each other. 20 minutes later, something interesting happens. The first student has captured more words, but the second student understands more ideas. Why? Because learning is not about collecting information. Learning is about forcing the brain to process it. And this is where the psychology becomes interesting. Cognitive scientists have studied how humans absorb knowledge for decades. One surprising finding appears again and again. When people physically write ideas, the brain activates deeper processing networks. Writing slows thinking down. That slowdown is powerful. It forces the brain to filter information, to summarize, to choose what actually matters. In other words, writing turns passive listening into active thinking. Small habit, it's big psychological shift. Now here's the strange part. The object that triggers this mental shift is incredibly simple. No battery, no notifications, no screen. Just a basic tool humans have used for centuries. A pen. But this simple habit reveals something deeper. Because carrying a pen is rarely about the pen itself. It is about readiness. Psychologically, people who carry one signal something subtle about their mindset. They expect ideas to appear. They expect information to matter. They're prepared to capture thoughts before they disappear. And ideas disappear faster than we think. In fact, psychologists estimate the average thought lasts only a few seconds before the mind moves on. Without capturing it, it is gone, completely gone. So the small act of carrying a pen becomes a form of intellectual awareness. A quiet message to the brain, pay attention, something valuable might happen here. And that message changes behavior. Let's imagine another scene. A young professional sits in a meeting at work. The discussion moves quickly. New strategies, new problems, new opportunities. Most people listen, some check their phones, but one person quietly writes a few short lines in a notebook. Not everything, just key ideas. Hours later, something interesting happens. When the team needs clarity, that same person recalls the discussion more clearly than anyone else. Not because they are naturally smarter, but because writing forced their brain to organize the information. This is called generative processing. The mind reshapes ideas instead of simply storing them, and that reshaping creates stronger memory. Suddenly the pen is not just a tool, it becomes a thinking device. But the psychology goes even deeper. Carrying a pen represents a mindset of intellectual responsibility. Smart students and thoughtful professionals rarely assume they will remember everything. They respect the limits of their own memory. Human memory is powerful, but it is also unreliable. We forget details. We distort ideas. We lose insights that once felt obvious. So intelligent learners build systems to protect their thinking. And the simplest system in the world begins with writing things down. This is why many great thinkers shared the same habit. Scientists, philosophers, inventors, and researchers often carried notebooks everywhere. Charles Darwin filled notebooks with observations about nature. Leonardo da Vinci wrote thousands of pages of sketches and thoughts. Richard Feynman constantly wrote ideas while exploring physics problems. Different centuries, different fields, same behavior. Capture the thought before it disappears, because knowledge grows when ideas are recorded, revisited, and refined. But here's a deeper reflection. A pen slows the world down. In a culture built around speed, that slowdown becomes powerful. Writing requires intention. You cannot scroll through it. You cannot skim past it. You must engage with it, line by line, thought by thought. And that engagement builds understanding. Sometimes the smartest behavior is not faster thinking. Sometimes it is slower thinking, deliberate thinking, careful thinking. The kind of thinking that turns information into wisdom. Small tool, deeper meaning. Carrying a pen is not about nostalgia for the past. It is about creating a space where ideas can exist long enough to grow. And that space is becoming rare, because modern life floods our attention with noise. Notifications, messages, endless streams of information. But the mind does not become powerful by consuming more. It becomes powerful by processing what truly matters. And that processing often begins with a simple act: writing the idea down. Which brings us back to the quiet observation we started with. In classrooms, in meetings, in libraries. The most thoughtful people often share a small habit. They carry something simple, something almost invisible. A pen, not because it looks impressive, not because it feels modern, but because it turns fleeting thoughts into lasting knowledge. And in a world overflowing with information, the people who capture ideas hold a quiet advantage. So the next time you see someone holding a pen during a lecture, or a meeting, or a conversation, you might be witnessing something deeper than note-taking. You might be witnessing a mindset that treats ideas as valuable resources, a mindset that prepares for learning before learning even begins. Because intelligence is not just about what you know. It is about how you treat the ideas you encounter. And sometimes the difference between forgetting an idea and building a new one begins with something incredibly small. Just a pen. So here's a question worth thinking about. Many great ideas have disappeared simply because no one was ready to capture them. If you enjoyed this exploration of psychology and everyday habits, consider liking the video and subscribing to The Pen Effect. And if this idea made you curious, the next video will reveal another surprising psychological habit that quietly shapes how powerful thinkers approach knowledge and decisions. You might never look at simple behaviors the same way again.